I do identify as European and as a Portuguese, but I must say that I uh, don't. I'm not very fond of the idea of identifying myself in a collective group. Because when you do so, when you say I am Portuguese or I am European, sometimes that means that you are refusing to identify with other realities. You are discriminating. You are, in a way, trying to show the differences, what separates you from other realities. So, yes, I identify myself as European and as a Portuguese, but that doesn't mean that I exclude the idea that I am a mixture of a lot of stuff. So um, just to make sure that I'm refusing the identity politics that nowadays are very common. It means that I'm open to new cultures, realities, and that openness doesn't affect my core beliefs or does not affect my core values. And more than that, that it enriches me and makes me a more tolerant human being. So I like the idea of being like Tony Judd said, edge people. I like to be in the middle of a lot of influences. So um, presenting myself as an European is a recognition that I'm much more than the place I was born in, and that I'm my my life and um, my convictions, my beliefs, my philosophy is open to new influences, and being an European is a good way to show that. I think that was the fall of the Berlin Wall, although not at the moment. I was not that adult at the time, but I was already very much into politics. And afterwards, I realized how important to me was the idea of the fall of the Berlin Wall and the idea of opening um, the reality and the lives of the Eastern European countries and how they were striking and striving for freedom. So I think that the fall of the Berlin Wall was a moment or a cathartic moment or a paradigmatic moment that show how freedom is so important and so natural and so um, part of our inner um, inner beliefs as human beings. And it was a moment of openness, a moment of reconciliation, a moment of gathering. And to me, that's very close to my idea of what European Union should be. So yeah, I would say the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Hmm. That's a popular answer, by the way.
In my generation, I guess so.
Definitely.
Uh, yes, in newer generations, I think that it's not the same. I tend to resist to those questions or to those answers because it would mean that the history was already written and closed, the recent history, and it's not true. Uh, One tends to think that the way Europe dealt with the crisis in 2008 was not a good moment for Europe. And I can understand why we tend to think that. Uh, but I also think it's too soon to say that. Uh, and if we go back to those times when we were expecting Greece to get out to be out of the euro, to be out of the European Union, or Portugal, or Ireland, or even Spain, and we look to the current times, exclude now coronavirus, but in the beginning of this year, well, Greece was already getting stronger. Portugal too, Spain too, Ireland too. So maybe our reaction to the crisis, with all the problems it had, was not that bad. So I would not answer the crisis of 2008, which I think is probably the most popular answer. I would say that it's very hard to me to understand why Europe has not yet come up with a giant, a digital giant company. In a world of digital economy, it's beyond my comprehension why in the 20 biggest digital companies, only one is European. And that's a championship that we are not even participating. And that is something that I find quite problematic for the future.
So your worst moment would be
The lack of competitiveness of Europe in the shaping of the new economy, the lack of conditions to create big companies for the new economy. That I would say that is it's something that worries me a lot, because it means that we are not being able to create the conditions to succeed in a future of the digital, where China and the United States are well ahead of us. We are living now in a pandemic moment, and I'm not very fond of alternative history, but I like to imagine what would the life of the European citizens in this pandemic situation if there was not European Union. How would we be in what concerns global chains of food, of supply of food, of medicines, of vaccines? Would we have the vaccines so quickly? Would we be able to have the vaccines so quickly? Would Portugal be able to cope with such a disruptive crisis if there was not European Union? So maybe this is a good moment to see what Europe can do for us. In that sense, I'm very European. I think that it's it's much what we profit from being in European Union is much more than what we lose. Although there are a lot of things that I like to criticize in European Union, but the current moment shows how important it is to participate in this project. So I would say that this moment shows how important European Union is, and how it makes our lives better and safer. The four freedoms um, are to me the base of the most effective economic model that brings prosperity, brings a growth, brings a better quality of life. So being part of a vast economic area with freedom to circulate, freedom to go, it's what I think I have to thank more to the European Union, to be part of a space of freedom. um, and it's sometimes I think that we like to think that freedom was something that is just given to us, and it was already there. But if we compare our lives in what concerns freedom to 40 years ago, it's a total different universe. How we developed more, and how we managed to benefit from it. So yeah, the freedom as base or as an important milestone of the economic model that we have now, is what I would like to answer to that question. Yeah. To be uh, uh, as competitive as China and United States in the new economy, because this means this may seem as a technocratic answer, but that is crucial to have uh, better jobs, better paid off jobs, more opportunities, and to be able to be competitive would mean that we will have a better education and a better social system. So, um, as an instrument, I would say that I would like to have Europe as competitive as China and the United States in the digital economy as an instrument, because that would mean that we would have a more um, social concerns, that we will have less social problems, because that would mean that we would be more prepared to the challenges that we face ahead. The initial project of the book was to write something very optimistic and very showing how incredibly developed the world was and how better off we were when we compare our days with 40 years ago or 50 years ago. I changed the project. I changed because it was not a time to be optimistic. It was a time to be more realistic. So I decided to write the book. Uh, of course, I said the world was much better than we thought about, but to present the main challenges that we are facing ahead and that are, in a way, a part or a sign or a consequence of being in a global world. So the book is less optimistic than it was when I foresaw it, but it's more. I think it's more realistic and can be more effective to prove the points that I was trying to make, that the globalization was the best tool for prosperity and growth that humanity has ever known. Well, I think that the vaccine is it's a good example. Can we imagine to have a vaccine less than 1 year after knowing the virus? And if we look to the vaccine, it's a result of work of people coming from different nationalities with different backgrounds that studied in different universities that are using previous knowledge that was discovered by other people coming from different nationalities too, different universities. That would not be possible without the intense freedom of circulation of knowledge and ideas, and also the techniques and the tools and the machinery that was used. It's were built and are result of other components coming from other places of the world that would not be possible to mix together if there was not an international market, if it was not a freedom of circulation. So the vaccine, in such a record time, and although it to us it took a lot because we were in desperate need of the vaccine. So every month without the vaccine, it's a month of delay. But if we think correctly, that would be it was a record. It was almost a miracle, and it would not be possible if the world was not a global economy. So I'd say that this can prove how the globalization is important to go through these different times. Another example I like to give is try to go to a supermarket and exclude all the products that are imported or all the products that have some components that are imported, either the glass where the product is stored or the paper of the label of the product. If you do so, you will have the shelves almost empty, which means that every day in our daily life we benefit from globalization, the enormous um, number of goods and services that we have and know today would not be possible or as cheap if we were not in a global world. So I think these two examples are good examples of how globalization is important to us. Exactly. You cannot cope a global challenge without globalization. It cannot be each country for itself. What we see in the fight against the global the climate change is that the more developed countries are well ahead of the ones who are not as developed. We cannot compare European emissions with China emissions. We are much more focused on that, and we are doing a much better work than those states, that those authoritarian states. So it's not possible statistically, looking to data, to agree with that sentence, showing that authoritarian states are better equipped or are doing a better job than liberal democracies. That may come from the fact that authoritarian states are worried first in their own legitimacy, not in the well-being of the society. The major concern of a dictator or the major concern of authoritarian leader is to save the face of the regime. So that means that in a crisis of public health, like coronavirus was, they were more interested in showing that they had nothing to do with the problem and that there is no problem, rather than go to a more um, uh, urgent answer to the problem. And that we saw that. We saw that with China and the first weeks of coronavirus. So, of course, that authoritarian states, because they are authoritarian and they do not worry about freedoms, can act quicker in several ways. But because they are authoritarian, they can often and more commonly act quicker and badly than the liberal democracies. There is not a perfect regime, of course, but I don't see in climate change any good set of data that shows that authoritarian regimes are better off in those criteria or in environmental criteria to compare better off than the democracies. I think that the best tool to reduce the emissions is technology, is knowledge, is knowing more to be more efficient, to have more, spending less. And that's where we should be focused on. That doesn't mean that culturally we cannot have different approaches, different ways to assume what we should do with our money and we should do with our time, and prefer to not travel by plane and travel by train or etc. I have nothing to say against those cultural waves that are more than legitimate, but I would say that in terms of public policy, the best way to deal with the environmental challenge is the technology to become more efficient, because that's the way that we can combine growth, economy, and of course the respect for the climate change. So I would say that are different levels. One is cultural, and I find legitimate, but it's not the economic answer. It's uh, so I would say that we should combine both of them. I don't see that the legal imposition of that would be it would be a good measure, because it would mean that we would freeze the technology. It's like, okay, the best way to deal with this is to stop our lives, to stop doing our lives. And you start with the planes and you start with the flights, and then you'll discover that the train, if you want to go from here to Copenhagen by train, it will also burn a lot of, it will cause a lot of emissions. So it's better not to go to Copenhagen. And then you start realizing that you should go only to Berlin, but to Berlin also in 20 years, you will discover that it's much better for you to not move at all, because that would mean that no emissions would be caused. So it's not the way to grow. It's not the way to get better. It's not the way to improve. It's like freezing the reality and going back. And I don't think that it's a good idea to tackle this challenge. In fact, you need for European Union to be more involved. You need to be more involved, the European Union to be more involved, and also multilaterally with the other economic um, models and countries. I'm lacking the word, the champions, the other economic champions. So because this is a global issue and needs to be tackled globally, there is no use for you to culturally or nationally start uh, preventing you from doing stuff and living your life to protect the environment if all the others are not doing the same. So you are falling behind, the others are going, and the problem is not being solved. So yes, I think that this is an issue where it's very important to act also in a more global level. I like to think that freedom of circulation is it's the base of globalization, right? It's the possibility for you to travel or to transport or to send or to import or to export in a more or less free way, with more or less barriers, but with that possibility. And that was or is the main tool for innovation and for technology, is the fact that you can easily import, export, easily contact, exchange globally ideas, knowledge, but also goods and services. So I think that the answer for the environmental problems we have, or the environmental challenges we have, is technology, is what will allow you to do more spending less, is what allow you to have electric cars instead of the cars that we have today. It's what will make it possible to produce more goods with less energy. So as a tool for better technology, freedom of movement is very, very important for the environment. It's the way, it's the tool to get more technologies, and we will need that desperately. Uh, in what concerns tourism, um, I would say that tourism raises challenges for destinations. Of course, it does. It has negative externalities. Of course, it has, like any other human action. But we should also take into consideration the positive externalities, and also um, try to let me put things this way. I don't like the idea of the tourism of the 70s or the 80s. That was the tourism for the rich people. Only rich people could travel. It was all fancy, less people on the streets, true, but it was an elite thing. So when we complain about tourism, the mass tourism, what we are saying is that we miss the times where only rich could travel. And I refuse totally that idea. Nowadays, we are also witnessing what happens to our economies when the tourism is not here. So we can now have a more balanced discussion on the effects of tourism and how can we profit from it and how can we have a balanced tourism economy. So um, the main challenge now is to make sure that we can still have that economic positive effects that the tourism was used to bring to our economies. It's not only the Portuguese, it's not only, and it's not only the Mediterranean countries that profit a lot from tourism. And yes, but to have a more sustainable tourism, we should not talk about only traveling because sustainability means public policies on zoning, on construction, on natural resources, on so um, it's not a question of only tourism public policies. We need to bring more public policies, sectorial public policies into this discussion. And I think that uh, we are now in condition to have a more balanced discussion. But I would not like to leave this meeting by, in a way, implying that tourism and environments are incompatible, because they are not. In a way, uh, if you have abandoned or desert territories, um, it's not good also for the territories. It's not good for, as we saw in Portugal with the fires. So um, I'm not answering your question because I don't think that I agree with the
Premise.
framework, the premises or the framework you gave.
Mhm.
Um, but of course, if we compare the zoning and urban policies in the world in the 60s or 70s, and now if we compare now, we are much more also advanced. We have now more knowledge. We have now more concerns, and we can plan better. We can zone better, and we can balance better the human action, not tourism, human action, and the environment. Well, what can be demonstrated is that automation creates much more jobs than it destroys. Historically, it was always the case. And if we look back to the last 30 years, it's still the case. There are much more jobs being created than being destroyed globally. So the question is, in every country, in every region, how would you make sure that the jobs that are being created here? And how do we make sure that our region is not a region where the jobs destroyed by automation are here? So how can we create that? And that's why in the beginning of our conversation, I said it's to me very crucial and important that Europe prepares itself to be competitive in this economy, digital economy, because we need the companies to be here. We need the digital companies to be creating jobs here. We need to make sure that we have the best environment for them to invest here and create jobs, because they will create a lot of jobs. Um, Other thing that is quite important to me is that I think we should stress is that nowadays the world is much more rapid, it's true, and more disruptive, it's true. This means that the disruption will happen during our lifetime, our working lifetime, not as before that was from generation to generation, which means that in our lifetime, in our working lifetime, we may face a disruption in our job that will make us be out of the job because of that disruption. So we need to make sure that now we have reskilling tools, that we have ways to reskill uh, the labor forces during the times they are working. We should look at that not as a way to save people from unemployment, but to save people from being displaced of the economy. We need to make sure that while working, people are being reskilled to the new dimensions of the economy and the new challenges that that economy is bringing to their industry. And that is a revolution that we need to make. Our social security systems and also our um, scaling programs are not prepared for this velocity, for the need to help people while they are working. And I would say that it's a very reskilling is one of the biggest challenges that we have to profit from globalization and not to be a victim of it. Well, it was already here. It's here to stay in the sense that this allows um, companies and businesses to have more opportunities to grow and to have more, to be more efficient, right? And one thing that is different from the moment we are living in this century is that the displacement of the economy was usually industries, right? It was the industry that was moving to other countries because the companies would prefer to build industrial complexes in other countries because they are cheaper and etc. The services were more or less protected from this kind of movement, and now that that's over, you can in fact hire people from the services industry whenever in the world, because internet artificial intelligence and robotization would mean that it would be possible to render services wherever you are to whatever you want to. So those are tendencies that are here to stay and that are also in the same field of the challenges that I was talking about reskilling. So you need to make sure that in your country, in your region, you have talented and skilled people to be competitive in this economy. Another thing which is different from this one that I'm saying is that suddenly people like to think that or tend to think that now work will be from home, and this is something that's here to stay. I don't believe so in that sense. If you look to the digital companies, they need and they were the fastest ones to send people home. um, they need brainstorming, they need creativity, they need diversity, they need people talking with each other, and this is very important. Uh, that's why cities are so important in this economy. People need to be together to create networking, and networking means physical presence, not a digital presence. So I would, in that sense, I'm more optimistic. I'm not well optimistic. I'm more. I think that it's a fantasy that we will now enter in a new world where people are working from home and uh, physical presence will be less relevant. I don't believe that.